Gurdeep, it's such a pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you so much.
You do a very interesting job because of the huge influx of immigrants coming to the US. And then obviously that attract a lot of political leaders and leaders from various states and countries around the world that come here.
Right.
And your services are absolutely required.
Yes.
And the amazing part where you became the focus was during the Prime Minister of India's visit.
Yes.
Not only to the US, to the UN and to other countries in the world. And you also led your efforts with the delegation of the past US President Obama when he went to India.
Yes.
It's interesting to learn from you, how this happened and what kind of service do you provide at that level?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here, though. Yes, I started as a diplomatic level interpreter in the Parliament of India, and the Indian Parliament has, two houses. So I was in the lower house, the House of Representatives, and I was an interpreter there for 6 years. So as a parliamentary interpreter, I interpreted for all the ministers, the heads of departments, all the members of the Parliament, Speaker, Prime Minister, and the foreign delegations that came there, and also for a lot of conferences, all India level and international level. And after 6 years, I came here to US with my husband and started looking, what can I do? And then I got to know that State Department has similar work. So I approached them, they tested me, and they have levels and levels of testing, and depending on what your testing level is and how far you can go with their levels, you can, be bumped up. So I reached the conference level and then the diplomatic level, and my security level has, increased with that. So yes, I have interpreted now for almost all the premiers from India. I have interpreted for Prime Minister Modi here, but I have interpreted for previous prime ministers in India, starting from Narasimha Rao, Chandrasekhar, yeah, and even Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So after that, I have come here and I've interpreted for the president and the prime minister. And each time Modi ji comes here, in fact, the first time Modi ji came here, Prime Minister of India Modi came here, he was going to give his maiden speech in Hindi in the United Nations. So the Indian embassy, in fact, called me for that, and it was a great honor for me. So I went and interpreted for him in the United Nations headquarters in New York. And it was a very long speech, about 45 minutes. And after that, he had to give a public address at Madison Square Garden. If you remember, everybody remembers, some 19,000 people were there. He gave his speech again in Hindi, and I was the only one doing that interpretation there. And then he went to Council on Foreign Relations in New York. I interpreted that as well. And after that, of course, US-India Business Council. And it so happened that, after a few months, he was going to go to G20. Now, US was not going to go again because they had just met here, but a Canadian government, the government of Canada, then got to know about me, and they asked me if I would be willing to go to Australia and interpret for him, and I said, okay, sure. So I went there and I interpreted for the G20 between the two leaders at that time. The Prime Minister of Canada was Stephen Harper. So he and I, were sitting, and Modi ji comes in, and Modi ji looks at me and says, "Aap wahan bhi?" Meaning in US, or "Aap yahan bhi?" And I was surprised, like he remembers, he just remembered that person that he had met a few months ago. So that was really interesting. And then after that, of course, I've done the interpretation in India also for, the meeting, the bilateral meetings and all that. And then Prime Minister Modi came to Canada for a state visit. So Canadian government again called me, and I was there with them for 3 days in Ottawa and Toronto and then Vancouver. So I even flew with them and I interpreted both in all the meetings as well as in the plane for them. So, the journey goes on, each time there is a meeting, there's a bilateral or something, I'm called and invited to interpret, and I enjoy, this is my passion, this is all I do.
I want to take you one level down now, because for people to understand this, when leaders come, some may speak in the regional language or national language, some speak, or most of them rather speak in English. So when you are interpreting, what are you actually doing there? Is it when the speech, like UN is a good example.
Correct.
The Prime Minister is delivering in Hindi, and you are at the same time trying to translate that into English. So, but during the discussions, is it a written thing that's given to you already pre-held? Whatever the leader is saying, then you have to interpret that on the go.
You interpret on the go. Here in the US at least, I don't know about the India side, but US government never provides us with any paper or anything like that. So it's whatever it is, you just interpret, that's about it.
The interesting question then is, there are a lot of other people who come from different parts of India, and they have their own regional expertise in languages, and they provide their services. So for somebody who's looking up to reach to a level where you are at, obviously. Yeah. So what are the career opportunities in this particular service?
You know, nobody starts as like at that level. You have to go through the grill, right? It's a difficult training. You know, you have to train yourself first, and then start like as a maybe as a trainee interpreter, like I did in the parliament. And they of course test you and see if you have the spark, and then they train you and all that. And it's a pretty rigorous training. And nowadays, when I was becoming an interpreter, there was no university degrees and all that. But nowadays, there are degrees in interpretation and levels of interpretation. You could do consecutive interpretation, simultaneous, and then conference level, diplomatic level. So there are many levels that you could graduate up to. And so it's a full-fledged college course. You could do that and then start slowly moving into meetings and conferences, and then making your way up into diplomacy.
Was this something that came to you by accident, or you were really interested in these things?
It did come as an accident, honestly. I was actually interested in becoming a college professor, and it just happened. I was doing my master's degree, and I just happened to see in India there was a newspaper ad for translators, not interpreters, but and translators are the ones that write, translate the written script into different language. And it just said needs a college degree, and I'm like, just for the fun of it, okay, let me see. I did, and I tested, and I passed. So the question was, I'm not going. I'm just playing with it. And my dad said, there's no harm. It's a good, government job and all that. Just go and at least, get your seniority there, at least. And then later on you decide. At least once you join it in India, your seniority is established. So I went and joined, and I left. I went and finished my master's degree for another 6 months or so. And then I went back just to see what's going on. And then I saw there was a person actually practicing for an interpretation test. And I said, this looks really interesting, lifetime. How can somebody do, when a person is talking, you are listening and you're interpreting in another language, how is it possible? So I said, let me go to the parliament itself. Since I was, an employee there now, I went inside the parliament and I saw how it's done, and it was amazing. I said, this is really great, really live going on like this. So I want to try this. So I went and I sat with some of the senior interpreters, and they said, can I do this? And they said, okay, we'll give you a sample. So they brought me some speeches from the floor of the house, and they say, okay, try this. I just tried for fun, and they said, my goodness, at the end of it, they all started clapping, and they said, you did 90% coverage. I said, I can't believe that. I said, very seasoned interpreters can do that. So basically, you just need to now polish your language a little bit to bring the political terminology and all of that. But otherwise, coverage-wise, you're fine. Okay. And that gave me a lot of, encouragement and confidence that, yes, I can do it. So I started preparing for the test. And like in a year and a half, 2 years actually, they did the test and I passed it. And so a new journey began, something that I've never imagined. I wanted to go to college back to my college as a professor, and that never happened. But no regrets.
How many languages do you speak fluently?
I do Hindi, Punjabi, and Urdu.
It's a great job. It's a great experience.
Thank you.
I didn't know about it until I met you, so it's
you
interesting
so
to learn things from you. It's wonderful to have you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.